In today's story, we have 4 different stories, and at first glance, these stories don't really seem to be related. But in my Bible, it seems like these stories are all told in one setting and at one time, like Jesus thought that they all had something to do with each other. So that's how I'm going to tell the story today, and I have a couple thoughts that I will share with you at the end about maybe how these different stories fit together. But I know that what God is teaching me might not be the same thing that He's teaching you. So please post your own thoughts in the comments below. I would love to hear what you guys are learning about what this story teaches us about God and about humanity, and if there's anything that you feel like this story addresses that is maybe something that you need to change. So this story seems to start off with what may be like a disagreement. The Bible doesn't really say there was a disagreement, but all of the disciples, they come to Jesus and they ask him a question. As you'll remember, Jesus is the only person in these stories with eyeballs. And the disciples say, Jesus, who is it that is going to be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? But instead of answering the question, Jesus calls a little child and has him stand among them. And Jesus says, you know what, your mothers probably rebuked you often for acting like children. But I am going to tell you something new today. Because the truth is, if you want to be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, this is what you need to do. You need to become like this little child. You need to be the last and the least and the servant of all. And Jesus says that if you welcome even just a little child like this in my name, you're actually welcoming me. And if you cause this little child to sin, it would be better for you if you had a large millstone tied around your neck and you were thrown into the sea. Jesus says, you know what, there is going to be a lot of grief and trouble that comes into the world. But the person who brings grief and trouble and sin into the world, it is very bad for them. If you are a person and your hand is often causing you to sin, what you should do is you should cut off that hand. It is so important to do whatever it takes to stop sinning, not just for your own sake, but so that you won't cause other people to sin. Because when you cause other people to sin, you are responsible for your own sin, and you are also responsible for the sin of the other person. Not that this person is not responsible for his own sin, but that this person has a double punishment for their sin. Jesus goes on to say that you should never look down on a little child because these little children have guardian angels, and these guardian angels are always in the presence of God, and they are ready to speak up in the very presence of God on behalf of their children. God looks out for the very smallest and the very least. It's like a shepherd. You know, a shepherd might have a lot of sheep, like 100. Doodly 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 doodly. And the shepherd loves all of his sheep. But what if there's one little sheep? It maybe seems small and unimportant, but it leaves the herd and it goes its own way. The shepherd is not just going to stay with the 100 sheep and say, oh, too bad about that one sheep that's lost. No, he's going to go after that one sheep and he's going to search for it until he finds it. He goes on to say, not just should you look out for the people who are overlooked, but you should also look out for the people who have harmed you. Say there's somebody who has done you wrong. You should not just leave it at that. You should go to them and you should try to be reconciled to them and have a conversation and see if the two of you can work it out. And if the two of you cannot work it out, you should go and you should get a couple trusted friends who can be neutral listeners and neutral observers and neutral mediators who can come along and help with the conversation. And there can be a restoration to that relationship. And if that doesn't work out, then you should take your friend to the church and you should go before the church leaders and the church elders and you can see how there can be a restoration in the body of Christ. And only then, after you have done everything you can, as far as it depends on you, then you may treat that person like a pagan or a tax collector. And then Jesus says a few things that I'm not really sure how they fit in with the rest of these stories. So definitely let me know what you think about these. He says that here on earth, whatever you bind will also be bound in heaven. And he says that whatever you loose will also be loosed in heaven. And Jesus says that if there are even just 2 of you who meet together and pray to God and ask something in my name, you can be certain that what you have asked for will be done for you. Maybe that has something to do with seeking reconciliation with your brother. That if there is more than one of you who agree that restoration is needed, and you go to your brother who's sinned against you and try to bring about reconciliation, that you can know that God is with you and he is also striving for the reconciliation in that relationship. I don't know if that's what it means, so let me know what you think it means. And after this story, Peter comes to Jesus and he says, "How many times should I forgive my brother? Should I forgive him 7 times? And Jesus says, "No, there is not a limit on forgiveness. Not just 7 times and then you're through. You need to continue forgiving him and continue forgiving him and continue forgiving him. Like 70 times, 7 times. Just forgive on and on and on and never stop forgiving. Always continue seeking reconciliation with your brother, because this is what the kingdom of heaven is like. There's a king who has many servants. And one day he starts to call all of his servants to him to give an account of what they've done and to settle up debts. So this one servant comes to the king, and this servant owes the king a lot of money. My Bible says that the servant owes the king 10,000 talents. Now, I'm not 100% sure what that equates to in modern day dollars, but it's very clear from the story that this servant is never going to be able to pay back this sum of money. Even if he spent all of his life working to pay off this debt, it is way beyond what he could ever repay. And so the servant kneels before the king and he begs the king, "Please just give me a little bit more time. I can get the money for you, but I just need some more time. Please don't punish me yet." And the king has compassion on the servant. And he doesn't just give the servant some more time. He totally and absolutely cancels the debt so that the servant will never, ever have to repay it. And that is what the kingdom of heaven is like. But that is not the end of the story, because you see, this servant, he goes out and he had another friend servant who owed him some money. It was a small amount of money. Like, I don't know, maybe they went out and they got coffee together and this servant paid for the coffee and expected the servant to pay him back later, but this servant never paid him back. So he goes to the servant and he says, "Hey, you owe me some money and I need you to pay me right now." And the servant says, "I don't have the money right now. Like, I left my wallet at home and I'm just like a little bit short on cash right now, but I really can get you the money. Like, it'll just be a couple weeks. Like, on my next paycheck, I could definitely pay you back. No problem at all." And the servant says, "No way." And he starts beating his fellow servant and he calls the guards and he has the guards send this servant to jail because he was not able to pay back such a small sum of money. And all of the other servants, they hear about this and they start talking among themselves, and they really don't think that a cup of coffee was worth getting thrown in prison for, and they're pretty concerned about it. And so they all gather together and they go to the king and they tell the king what has happened. And the king says, what? And so the king calls back in the first servant. And he says to the first servant, "I forgave you that huge debt, and you were unwilling to forgive your servant of such a small debt. This is what's going to happen. You are going to be handed over, not just to the jailer, you are going to be handed over to the torturer. And the torturer is going to continue torturing you until you are able to pay back the debt." Now, I don't know about you, but I think this is a pretty scary story. And I think it's interesting how Jesus shared all of these stories together and how they must all relate to each other. Like, maybe this story at the end, maybe those are all explaining what it means to be greatest in the kingdom of heaven, which was the disciples' original question. And in order to be great, we see from these stories that you need to be looking out for others. You need to be looking out for the weak and the innocent. And you need to be faithfully and persistently seeking to reconcile with people who have harmed you. I have to say that as I retell this story, especially the last one about forgiveness, it's pretty convicting for me. And I feel like there are some people in my life who have hurt me, and I have a hard time forgiving them and still feel bitter when I think about them. And so I know that from this story that I really need to be forgiving these people from my heart and not hold anything against them, but welcome a restoration of relationship if that's something that they're interested in. Not that I'm going to allow them to continue harming me, but that there's a way for me to continue a relationship with these people without allowing them to continue hurting me. But I know that what God is teaching me might not be the same thing that He's teaching you. So please post your own thoughts in the comments below. I would love to engage in a discussion with you. And please engage in a discussion with each other about these. And I will see you in the next video.